These are supposed to be something that's real and meaningful for an institution. And one of the ways that we thought that core values might very fruitfully become a more living thing for teams would be as a part of staff's evaluation and goals. Um, and that's a process that's usually done at the end of the year. We do performance evals. I'm sure many of you are suffering through that process right now. And establishing goals for the coming year. And we thought this would be a good time to talk about ways to make core values a little more real and a part of a part of people's goals ongoing. So we have with us today three amazing people who we're thrilled are donating their time to talk with us all about this. I will ask each of them to give more of an introduction of themselves, but we have Hollie Colahan, who is in a few weeks, she will be the executive director of the Arizona-Sonora Desert Museum. We have Kristin Finney, who is the CHRO at the Houston Zoo. And we have Rick. I never get your last name right.
Nobody ever does.
I'm sorry.
Nope, it's so good. Skydeman.
Thank you. Rick Schuiteman, who is the executive director at the Fort Wayne Children's Zoo. I'm going to ask each of them, I guess I'll just do alphabetical or something, to introduce themselves and tell us just a little bit about the core values at your institution. And Hollie, you can speak for Birmingham or speak about what you know about ASDM. But we will start with you since you begin with a C.
Thanks, Lori. Yeah, I'm gonna. I think when I speak of sort of from an institutional perspective, we'll speak to what we have done at the Birmingham Zoo. We recently sort of did some review and updating, so I'll talk about that because I know there's a couple of folks from the museum on this call. So I certainly don't want to try to speak for the museum since I'm not going to start working there for 3 weeks. But I'll share, yeah, mostly from my experience at Birmingham and some other just general resources. But operationalizing core values has been a really important thing to me, recently. I think it's super helpful for all the reasons, Lori brought up.
I think mine is a similar kind of take on it that as Hollie's in terms of just like when we revisited our mission and vision, our first strategic plan in 2017. And so we came up with a mission and vision, and for whatever reason didn't talk about core values. Like I said, we had some guiding principles, but not necessarily core values. And so the next iteration of our strategic plan was where we really kind of drilled in and said, this is something that we want it to be meaningful and important to us and our staff. But not just to have the words, but as Hollie was saying, to actually use them as a common ground is really what we were looking for whenever there's, not just decision making, but also, and I don't want to say, I'm sure none of us have conflict or anything like that within our teams or departments or even in the organization. But it's something, that we can really kind of point back to when you're having trouble, kind of figuring out like, what are we doing this for? Or like, why are we doing this? It's nice to have those organizational values that you can really go back to and say, this is what we put as a standard for our organization, and this is how we're going to move forward. And this is the common ground that we did all agree on. And to kind of use to go forward. And so we have worked really hard over the last 3 years to really, kind of make sure that we are pointing back to those things, not just as a leadership team, but for our staff as well. And so I think, it's nice and good to have them. I think what people struggle with the most is how do we use them, and how do we make them real for our team, and how do we keep them alive so that way, we can have that sort of foundation and that standard of whatever it is, it's performance or expectations or behaviors or whatever it is we're striving to do. So I think that was sort of, our reasoning for making sure that we had some core values to really lean into.
And for us, I think we really wanted to have sort of a rallying call, that something that everybody understood, everybody could get their arms around, and everybody could support. And sometimes I'll see mission, vision, values, all these things that focus sort of on maybe the animal side of it or the conservation side of it. And I hear people in operations saying, well, how can I be a part of this? People in food service. And so we really wanted to find words that everybody understood and everybody could be a part of. And so one of the things that was important for us was to get all the teams in one room, talk about our mission, our vision, our values, our core purpose, and have them workshop how they are, how this relates to their work and how their work impacts the mission. And so really, when we're all talking the same language, again, trying to keep it simple and easy so everybody can learn it quickly and understand it, I think it ended up being a really great rallying call. And I think we're going to talk about it in the next segment, but putting it in just about everything we do so they see it over and over again, and can feel like they're a part of it.
So here's my sort of follow-up question to any or all of you on that. And I should say, if any of the participants have comments with you, raise your hand, put something in the chat, shout out, whatever works for you. How do you make sure, how do you actually do the process of making sure these are more than just words on a page? We can say this as much as we want, but how do we actually do it? And I'll throw a really tough example out there. I don't know if I'll name the institution or not, but I know that there was a zoo that it had diversity and inclusion among its core values, and it had on its summer camp um, application, all it did was ask for what pronouns does your child use, and it ended up being creating a hubbub um, among the community. It was a fairly conservative community, and as far as I know, the institution stuck with its values and maintained that question and, sort of had that conversation with the person, I think it was a board member, making it even more challenging, who was unhappy about that question being asked. But how do you make sure you're going to stick with those values when tough stuff like that comes up?
I think one of the references I really like about core values, it's a few years old now, but Patrick Lencioni wrote a book called The Advantage, and he talks in there about corporate values and core values. And one of the things that he talks about in that book is that you're going to hold to those values even when it's hard, and even when it potentially hurts you. And I think, Lori, to your question, I don't think you know until it happens, right? I think you can, in that process of creating them, I think there are questions you can ask, right? And say, are we really true to this, even in this situation, even in this situation, even if this happened, even if, right? And I think right now, as we see a bit of a, some political shift, right? We see a lot of organizations abandoning DEAI programs. And I think for us at Birmingham, inclusion was a core value for us. It still is, just I'm not there anymore. And that is one I think we frequently did go back to, right? And say, okay, how does this, factor in? But you also have to balance that piece of when it's going to cause harm, how much harm, right? And how much of this is internal to us as an organization. And I will say in Birmingham, there were a lot of things we could do in a really big way internally, but try to take that farther external, particularly outside the Birmingham metro area, was very difficult and potentially very harmful to the organization. And so that was a constant piece that we had to come back to say, is this stuff we're just doing inside? Is it stuff we are doing externally? And if so, how are we communicating that? And that can be a very difficult thing for the staff as well, that, why don't we want to, jump on, this bandwagon or that event or whatever that is. And trying to navigate that, I think, can be really difficult. We actually, in our strategic plan, when we were updating our core values, we're trying to think about partnerships. Part of our strategic plan was about being an authentic community partner. And we were trying to define, like, how would we choose community partners? And we were struggling because we started with what I think a lot of us start with, which is mission alignment, right? And we thought, well, but we have a lot of really great partners who aren't, who don't have the same mission as us, right? They're, and we're like, so we, had an affiliation with the Alabama Institute for the Deaf and Blind. Well, their mission was nothing like our mission, right? There's very little, it's not mission conflict, but there was very little mission alignment. And someone said, you know what? I think what we want is partners with core value alignments, not mission alignments. And I really love that. And everybody really embraced that. And I love that approach for thinking about, partnerships and who you're going to work with and how you're going to move forward. Mission is super important, but to me, core values have become even more important in how we make those choices.
That's brilliant. I love that.
I would say too that, it seems like the obvious thing to say, because I think it is obvious in a way, but I think in action, it's a little bit more difficult to achieve, which is, when we had conversations about our core values, even at the leadership level, it's so important to make sure that you have alignment among your leaders so that when you have to, kind of back up your decisions for your core values and things like that, that you don't have anyone that's wavering on what that should mean or look like. And so, when we had our discussions about core values, it was really, are we going to be able to put our money where our mouth is when it comes to these core values? And if we're not, then we shouldn't have them, And so I think it's an easy thing to say, but again, I think more in action, it's harder, because I think sometimes, if you get that pushback or you have that, a little bit of struggle or challenge with whether it's a community partner, whether it's your guests, whether it's even among your own staff, then unless you can have like a, kind of unified leadership team that believes strongly and is going to back up the things that we put in place, it's very difficult, right, to kind of make sure that that kind of lives out and goes forward. So I think, that was one thing that we had to really look at as well, because we haven't necessarily been challenged in the way of like, hey, this is a core value that doesn't make sense, or why would you have this? But at the same time, I think we would feel comfortable and, strong about the reasons why we decided to put those in place and be able to speak to them. And so I think that's just, again, maybe an obvious point, but important.
I'll tell you a little story that happened here at this zoo a couple of years ago. It was Pride Month, and a couple of the staff in our food service space put pride flags out on display, and a guest was very upset about it. And they went right to guest services and complained that my child is seeing this flag, and now I have to explain what it means. And the guest services person, doing what the guest services people do, they tried to solve it by saying, we'll take down the flag right away. The flag didn't come down. The guest went back to check, saw the flag was there, even more infuriated, went back to guest services and said, this is unacceptable. I told you, why is it still up? And so then the guest services person literally went out and took down the flag. Of course, one of our core values is being welcoming. And we thought to ourselves, whoa, wait a minute. Why didn't somebody engage a leadership member to say, hey, you know what? This is something that's okay with our staff. We're celebrating all people, and in this month, we're celebrating this community. And so the problem was there was that disconnect, right? The guest services people are trying to solve the problems. We've got these nice core values, but they're not applying it in the moment. And so we realized at that point, okay, we've got some work to do, and we need to we need to resolve that and have better communication with the team, make sure they understand what it means, but also get some support from leadership if they run into a situation like this. So the bottom line is these things are going to happen, especially when you're in a large institution. So communication is important. Always walk the talk, but also understand that you're going to have to evolve a little bit. And as things change, as the climate changes, you're going to have to keep looking at your core values and your mission and vision, and things might change. It's a great starting point and it's a great ending point, but in between, there's going to be conversations and things might have to shift and change and adjust and train, articulate and rearticulate your thoughts. But that example is just something that it didn't quite work the right way. We talked about being welcoming, but the staff wanted to solve it immediately, and they thought that was the best way to do it. At the end of the day, the conversation ended up being like, wait, why are there flags out there? Because we give everybody these wonderful pins to wear. So that ended up being another conversation. But again, I think it's a part of the learning process. And I think everybody has to understand that there'll be ups and downs, but use these core values as your starting and ending point.
Yeah, Rick, thanks for thank you for sharing that story. I think that probably resonates with a lot of people on this call in sort of core values, perhaps living themselves out in ways that we don't necessarily expect. So we've talked quite a bit about sort of at the organization and leadership level about why core values are important, how they can present in our organization, and how we can live them. I'd like to now talk a little bit about the ways in which leaders can support their employees in understanding and embracing core values as part of their professional development, and particularly in their annual goal setting. And Rick, since you just sort of talked about the connections and disconnections between leadership and staff, maybe I can ask you to start with this question.
Sure, of course. So once we revisited our mission, vision, values, and we looked at our core values, we wanted to put it out there. And instead of just in private meetings or in high level communications, we put it out there. So we have these words, these phrases, out in the conference room, out in our entry lobby. But one of the things that we wanted to do that would engage all levels was we put it on, I'm going to try to hold it up here, on we call our Zoo Excellence card. And our Zoo Excellence card, you can see, lists all of these core values right here. And the program is created where any employee can give this card to another employee. They can give it to their boss, they could give it to their staff, they could give it to their colleagues and peers. And on the back of it, they would write the person's name, and they would actually mark what the person did, which core value they demonstrated, and which area of excellence they demonstrated. So they actually have to then be familiar with these to be able to mark it. And then, of course, there's the little thank you piece about why you're giving them the card and indicating the little thank you note. And so hundreds of these things are going out and about the zoo because everybody and anybody can give them out as a nice little thank you note. But again, it's just right there in front of everybody. You can see what those core values are. You have to think about them when you mark them. Just last week in one of our leadership lunches, we reviewed it again with the team just to reiterate, this is the card, this is what these mean, this is what you mark and how you mark it. And then at the end of the year, we actually tie it into their annual appraisal or review, where we actually evaluate everybody's performance based on these core values. And so, for example, purposeful, they would score that area. And there's examples of how to be purposeful, collaborative, enthusiastic, welcoming, examples of that. And that is actually how our appraisals are currently built, is that you evaluate those core purposes and how you did, and your leader then also evaluates. So the individual evaluates and they evaluate, but it's right there in front of everybody. So again, it's just tying all these things in together.
I love that informal yet continual peer-to-peer positive reinforcement, as well as sort of the 360 with the leaders involved. That's an awesome program. Congratulations and kudos to you. Kristin, I know you and I recently had a conversation about what's going on at Houston and some of the ways that you've been evolving your recognition programs and your goal setting and annual performance reviews. Can you talk a little bit about what's going on there?
Sure. It's still a work in progress, I'll say. You know, when you start doing these things, it takes time for sure to kind of penetrate through all the staff and for them to kind of get on board and really know that, you know, these are things that you really are expecting from them. But we've done a couple things when we, you know, I'll try to summarize it as quickly as I can, but we wanted to make sure that they were, you know, rolled out and communicated well. So, you know, we did the normal things like, you know, you start making posters for everyone and they do the thing. And that was one thing that was great. We wanted people to be aware. But then we started doing other things like we made, you know, we made a video with core values where we had our senior executive team go on, you know, go on camera. And it's just a short video where each of us is partnered with another executive team member, and we talk about the core value and what that means. And then we've also done a few games like in our town hall meetings where we've said, you know, who can say what a core value is and what it means, and then they pop up and they get a prize, you know, and things like that. So we've done some fun things like that. We've also done, we started to put it into our mid-year evaluations just this year, which that was the first time that we actually had it. Something very similar to what Rick was saying, how they do like a self-assessment of their, you know, how they feel they're sort of, you know, doing on the core values and examples of those for themselves. And then their manager does one for them and they kind of see, you know, how and if they're aligned and stuff like that. And they rate, you know, themselves, and then their manager rates them. We are in the middle of our annual evaluation right now, so kind of see how that shakes out. We'll have a little bit more data, I think, later on to see, you know, how we're doing in those areas and things like that. But we've done, you know, we do things on our careers page, like I mentioned, you know, at the beginning, where you know, we wanted to make sure that we were attracting the candidates that we wanted, what was important to us. And so we put our core values up. They're one of the very first things that you see along with our mission and vision on our careers page, so that people can kind of see what we're about. And then I think one of the most exciting things that we've done that we just rolled out in just earlier this month at our town hall meeting, we completely redid our staff award and recognition program organization-wide and things like that, where we created the awards that are aligned with our core values. And so staff nominates, it's a staff nominated, you know, they nominate each other, they nominate their peers, their coworkers and things like that for, you know, awards based on a core value. So we just rolled that out. It will actually go into effect in January. And then we have sort of prizes and swag that we've designed with our branding team and graphics that kind of go along with, you know, their whatever they win. So like if it's, you know, for inclusion, there's going to be, you know, like you get to choose an umbrella or a hat or a t-shirt, you know, or something like that. So we have little graphics for each of our, I don't know if you can see them on our website. They look like this. But we have little graphics for each of our core values and things like that. So we'll have, you know, the zoo branding along with the core value graphic and stuff like that, where people can, you know, and they get to wear it to work. So that's always fun for them. So it's been kind of exciting to see. Again, not a lot of data yet, because this is still, you know, newer-ish to us in terms of how we've sort of reimagined some of these things. And we have a lot more ideas coming up for next year. But I think it's just that continual, right, like integration of sort of everything that you do and every chance that you get to kind of make sure that your staff feels a part of those core values and that they understand how those are being lived out. We even have like our MOD, our manager on duty. I know a lot of zoos and aquariums have those. And so we have a report at the end of the shifts that, you know, some managers have really embraced, where they're shouting out, you know, all of our core values along with what they sort of saw on grounds that day, you know, with aligned with a core value, what a staff member has done, or, you know, something like that. And so that's been really neat to see. And we didn't ask them to do that. They started to kind of do that on their own. So just some really fun kind of things that now people are starting to think of things on their own, which has been really, really neat to see.
I'm interested in how you've been going a little off script here, Lise. I'm interested in how you maintain that momentum, because I have at least two different institutions that I worked at. We had versions of the core value cards. They weren't core values, they were some other thing. And we also did, Kristin, the MOD
Mhm.
process where you were supposed to catch somebody doing something good, and we started off with great enthusiasm, and all of the managers embraced the process, and then it just kind of petered out. And I don't know if it was just that we hadn't approached it in the right way, hadn't presented it to the senior team in the right way, or to the broader team in the right way. But I'm interested in any of the panelists or any of the people on the call, if you've got any advice for maintaining that kind of a process.
I would say that one thing, it's helpful if the leader at the top supports the program and is passionate about it, because that person will be responsible for keeping it alive, keeping it in the conversation, making it a priority. So it's near and dear to my heart, because I was a part of creating the program. So of course I'm going to love it, and I'm going to push it, I'm going to talk about it all the time. But there are times, sure, that we get distracted by the other happenings of the day, the month, the year, right? So I try to reinvent it from time to time, where we approach it differently. So maybe one month the team is presenting it at a learning lunch. Maybe the next month we're sharing it in a different way, and taking a different angle on it. But I think that at the end of the day, the cheerleaders of the program have to keep cheering and have to keep it alive. Otherwise, it will get buried. And sometimes that does happen. But for me, it's sometimes just kind of reinventing it, revisiting it, making it a little bit different. And if that just means maybe rebranding it sometimes, that's okay too. We went through a rebranding process. New signs, more signs, different signs, just different ways to just keep it alive, keep it fresh, and keep people talking about it.
Lori,
I think
oh, go ahead, Kristin.
Oh, sorry, Elise. I think the other thing too is, the trick is, I think, to maintain sort of what motivates people, right? And so I think it's always kind of asking and getting feedback about, what did you like about this? What did you not? We're a big data-driven organization. We love our data. We do a lot of surveys and asking and evaluation and all that kind of stuff. And we learn so much from that. And one thing that we've been diligent about for several years now is just our staff surveys and asking these things. So what I kind of anticipate is, we haven't done a lot yet because this is fairly newer-ish in terms of, how we're really incorporating core values, but to start to really ask some good questions in our staff survey about the core values and what it means to them and how they would like to see things kind of, evolve over time. And, are the things that we doing meaningful to you? Would you like to see something else? So I think it's really just staying on top of, like, what is motivating your staff? What is really kind of getting them excited about it? Stop doing the things that don't make sense, and, just look at a bunch of, and I think that's the challenge is, how do we continually be creative about how we're trying to motivate people and get people engaged in some of these core values. So I think just asking them questions, and really making sure that they're a part of, the things that we're doing and putting into place, and that they're kind of engaged in that work.
Yeah, and I'll actually piggyback off of what Kristin just said. I say this a bit irreverently, but I mean it in all seriousness. An organization that I worked for, cash prizes worked great. And that motivated people, right? So we had two really important parts to our core value sort of goal setting and evaluation. The first was a monthly peer nominated program where our organization had 4 core values, and we made up these adorable little lucite awards that had the emblem of the core values on them, and we could each peer nominate. And then there was a nonpartisan, multi-departmental review panel that would elect the winners for every month. And so there was a little bit of a non-performative sort of competition for who could have the most little tiny prizes in their office, which was just fun. And then at the end of the year, there was actually a not insignificant, but not budget breaker award for one really big prize for each year for a person who had really gone above and beyond in these goals. And that was a really important ceremony that we had, and it was really lovely and fun to be a part of. And great for the leaders to sort of celebrate their team members. And then we also had in our annual performance reviews, we had the quantitative part of our annual performance review, which was, did you meet the goals that you had set for the year? And then the qualitative, how are you living out your core values? And you know, we had quarterly check-ins that were very informal and really just sort of making sure that we were on track for what we wanted. And we always talked about the sort of, again, the quantitative goal setting as well as the qualitative, how are you presenting as a good team member, as a good player, as a good individual. And then at the end of the year, we'd have a more substantial evaluation that went into their annual file. But it was a constant conversation, again, to Kristin's point, it was a constant conversation about what's working, what's not working. When we rolled it out, it definitely had bumps. It took a long time for people to understand why people can really grasp the quantitative part of I'm being adjudicated on, did I meet 100% of the goal that I set? It's much harder to evaluate yourself on the qualitative part of, am I a good person? Am I doing the right thing? Am I living this value? But the more we talked about it, the more people got comfortable with it, and it really started to embed itself. So we have just 15 minutes left, believe it or not. So Lori, I know that we have one or two more questions, but I would really love to open it up to our large participant group to see if there's anyone who has questions or have insights of their own, any really wonderful things that you're doing at your organization to support goal setting around your core values. So feel free to put something in the chat, but if there's any brave soul who wants to pop off of mute and join the conversation, we'd love to hear from you. So I'll leave some space for that right now.
Yeah, I have a question for Hollie or anyone else who's done this. Do you have any examples of actually applying the core value test to evaluating a partnership? How do you evaluate another organization's core values?
Yeah, I don't, this was still fairly new. This was just in the last year that we had kind of, you know, made this decision in Birmingham. And for us, where we had applied it so far was really on the inclusion front. So that's why Alabama Institute for the Deaf and Blind really made sense. We were, you know, bringing in sign language interpreters. They were providing sign language training for our staff. We were looking at ways to make the zoo more accessible to them. Like, so that very much fit under our inclusion umbrella. Same thing with in Birmingham, we had a LGBTQ affirming charter school, and we partnered a lot with them on various initiatives. So again, very much fell into the inclusion bucket for us, and those, you know, relationships continued and did well. Another place when we revised our core values is we had a core value of sustainability, which was a little bit, I think there's a couple of these that I think can be misinterpreted, or everybody defines it their own way. We actually changed that value to stewardship, that I think that was going to help us find sort of more alignment with conservation themed with groups as well. And so, you know, kind of we were very focused on local conservation, and that was an important, you know, partnership for us. So I think that was another place where we could align. We did not get to a place in that amount of time where we really had to say, hey, is this working or not working? I think probably as we continue to expand, I think we would have they will start to run into some places where I think there are groups, just given the, you know, the political climate in Alabama, both from an environmental standpoint and from a diversity and inclusion standpoint. I think it's probably more likely to come up of like, do we want to partner with this group when they don't share those values with us or don't focus on those as much? Is it still worth it because they're doing good work, you know, somewhere else? I think that will be a test of the process. I did not have to tackle that in my time there, but I think it will come up.
Yeah, because I think that I love the idea of thinking about alignment being more about values than about mission. But you still have the same question. At what point are values in conflict? And again, it's a subjective thing, you know, to try to figure this out. I don't want to miss the two things in the chat. The resource that Hollie put up there, the website is awesome. So grab it and bookmark it. The question about if anyone is willing to share a core value related performance review, how you have put that into the review process, please send it along and we'll be happy to distribute that out. And Lisa, you have a question.
Yeah, it sort of relates to some of the stuff in the chat also. This has been super helpful. I feel like I could talk about this for like 5 more hours or 5 more days. So I'm wondering if the folks on the panel would be willing to share their contact information, and maybe we start a conversation offline about some of this, because there are like a million avenues that we can continue to talk about.
Sure, I'm happy to share my contact information. I think as far as any examples go, so we use an electronic database, or not database, but our HRIS system essentially for our performance reviews. It's a little hard to send that, but sometimes we have, we've done a few manager resources and things like that for training purposes that, we have like a 1-pager of like, this is what it means and examples. So, I could forward that along if that is helpful. But I'm happy to share my contact information and, talk offline. If you
That'd
would
be
like.
great, because like all the
Okay.
things you were rattling off, I was like, I can't get this all down.
Yeah.
So,
I also have a wonderful HR director that is very helpful and resourceful as well, that I may pawn some of the contact off on her as well, because she is very, she does a lot with this stuff as well. So I'm
absolutely.
sure she would be
Great.
happy to touch base.
Great. Thank you.
Lisa, I actually have a question for you. You just said that you could talk about this for 5 more days and that it's pinging a lot of avenues in your head. And knowing that Canopy likes to continue these conversations, what are some of the ideas that are coming up, or what are some of the things you want to dig more into that we might be able to consider for a future webinar?
Yeah, so I think the concrete examples part of it and the performance management, like the actual practical applications of that, would be really interesting for me. And then on a big picture level, there's also the issue, this came up about in our new political environment, how do we stick with our core values? And I think I wrote it down. Somebody said, like, you communicate some of them internally and some of them externally. Like, how do you do that in a in the best way? Because I used to work for the state, and so I'm super paranoid, and so I think I need to know where my paranoia is valid and where it's not.
I think it's a good point, and I think what Holly said about it is very resonant. You have to sort of weigh the costs. There is a cost sometimes, and we have to decide where we stand up against that risk. And I think that's an important internal discussion for all leadership teams to have and to have regularly. One of the other things that I will say was resonant for me, and again, this question of how you keep this going. And I like the emphasis on leadership reaffirming it, because I really think that's where it's going to be driven from. If we see that leadership says, oh, we're busy right now, we're going to let this go, that gives us permission to let these kind of things go. And I also really appreciated, Rick, when you talked about different way, change it up, change how you do this.
I was going to jump in and just about commitment. So I have committed as the executive director here at the zoo that I will attend every single new hire orientation, and I will share the mission, vision, values, and our core values with the team. And so they'll hear it from my mouth, they'll hear the passion, and they'll understand that it's important to me. I'll also talk about guest service, and I'll talk about some other things, But that's one of my commitments. Now, there have been a couple of times where I wasn't able to make it because of something that happened, but I've done a video recording, and I had one of the other directors fill in my place. But at the end of the day, that's just one of my commitments, because it comes from the top. And if the new hires hear it and see it, I believe that's going to make an impact. It's going to make a difference. And then we just have to carry it through to all levels.
I think the other piece that is important that I'm always harping about is we have to write this stuff down, right? I think if it just lives in somebody's head, or if you just, you need those, like Rick said, you need those people that are passionate about it. But if that's the only place that it lives and that's the only place you can find it, that's not sustainable. And obviously this has very much been on my mind the last few months as I think about leaving an organization, and an organization where we weren't always good about writing things down. And that was a passion of mine. As we saw, we're all seeing more turnover in our organizations, and you lose that information. So I think one of the things, and it's in that Brene Brown resource that I posted, but write this stuff down and truly operationalize it, right? Really say, what does it mean to, display, to live inclusion? And what does it mean to, one of our core values is excellence, right? And I had spent quite a bit of time writing what we're calling standards of excellence for various things. So here are the standards of excellence for what it looks like to open and close the zoo every day. And that's the gate opens on time, and things are open, and signs are updated, and all of those kinds of things, because otherwise people create their own story in their head of what those things are. All these are just words, and they mean very different things to various people. So the more you can write that down and turn it into behaviors, that makes it more clear to your staff. And then that becomes the tool that you use in the evaluations, right? Are you exhibiting these behaviors as we as an organization have defined them, not how me as an individual defined them? And I think we had some conversation here about one of our core values is passion. And I feel like that's a term that we as an industry have really weaponized and used to take advantage of people over the years. And so I was like, if we're going to keep this, like, we need to be super clear about what it means. It doesn't mean work 60 hours a week, for no pay, right? What does this mean? And really spelling that out for people, because otherwise people can tell themselves a negative story as well, right? And then that hurts your buy-in.
And then just tagging onto what Hollie said, just making sure that you engage every single, for me, it was important, every single team member understood how they can impact these core values, how they impact their work. And so if it means doing some workshops where they can start identifying, okay, how am I welcoming? How am I adaptable? How am I enthusiastic? These are ours. That helps them feel like they're a part of it, because I've heard many times, oh, I can't, the mission doesn't work for me. I can't do it. No, you can. Let's talk about how you can. And maybe there's not a direct way, but we can figure out a way. So I think that's important, that everybody understands, and you give them the time to think through it.
Rick, thanks for bringing that up. I actually made a note when you were talking at the very beginning about this to ask you about your process of including your staff and your team into the development of your core values. So it sounds like you did some workshops once the values were established, but what was the process for getting your entire team on board and bringing them along for the ride?
Well, for us, it started when we were creating our strategic plan. We just didn't have the leadership team working on it. We opened up the meetings to all staff that wanted to attend. There was a couple that were voluntary, some that were not. And so everybody could hear the message, everybody could hear what we're doing. And then we asked them to provide feedback and thoughts and opinions. And there was a whole process that Canopy helped us with, thankfully. But we had everybody engaged. And then we created separate teams where they could be a part of different teams to help work on our mission, vision, the core values. And then from that point on, we ended up with, I think, 21 different objectives. And we asked the team to participate in those. So as a part of their goals, their end of the year goals, it was to be a part of one of these teams working on the objectives. So they were a part of the process all along. even now when they're working on the objectives from our strategic plan.
Great, thank you. Lori, we have 4 minutes left. Hard to
Yes.
believe.
Yes, I know. Can I try another quick question?
Please do.
And this is sort of a very general one, but how do you see a benefit in the organization? How does this play out? What difference do you notice in the organization, Rick or Kristin, since you're relatively new to it, but have you seen any difference?
I would say yes. Part of it is anecdotal in terms of just like we see sort of the productivity and engagement with staff. The other side of it is too, although we haven't asked specifically yet in any of our staff surveys about core values specifically, I think what we're seeing is that we have really high participation rates in our staff survey, which is phenomenal. You want to hear feedback, you want staff, which means hopefully that we're not just using a survey as, like, hey, a carrot, but it's literally like, hey, we're taking this and we're doing something from what you all tell us. So I think from our staff surveys, just like the level of engagement, I mean, we have, a plethora of different questions that we ask from, culture and mission to, DEI, and things like that. And so, our data has shown us, I think, from our staff and the level of engagement that they, have, and our participation in the survey, that we've done something. We've done something right. We can always do better, and things like that. But I think for us, that's the most telling, when we can get that. Again, I think as we move forward, learning more about how we want to incorporate core values specifically, we can ask, those types of questions in the survey as well, to have a little bit more substance around, I think we're doing great.
Yeah, and for me, I think, again, it's sort of that rallying call. We can all get around it. We all understand it. We all can speak the same language. It can be any work group. It doesn't just have to be 1 or 2 work groups. It's all of us. I see success when I see hundreds and hundreds of these Zoo Excellence cards that are going out. Our last meeting, we actually recognized the people that received the most. We also recognized the groups that gave out the most.
Yeah.
So we know it's successful that way.
I love it. Liza, I'll let you have the final word in terms of the recording and where people can find it, but thank you all so much. Again, another topic where we're going to have to continue the conversation because of the level of engagement, and we will plan to do that.
Yeah, thank you all so much for attending. I know I've seen some of you on our other webinars this year, but we kind of relaunched this webinar series in 2024 with the goal of really focusing on, making our community more inclusive as well, and talking about some of these topics that are certainly top of mind. So this has been our 3rd one of the year, and we're very excited to continue into 2025. I always post the recordings on our YouTube channel. So if you missed the other 2, feel free to check them out. And what else? Yeah, we've gotten some great resources in the chat. So, I'll send out a follow-up with those links. And if our panelists are amenable, their contact information just for this group. So yeah, and I think Elise put in the chat as well, but if you have any more specific resources as well, particularly related to what your organization is doing, core value related performance review documents, anything that has been helpful to you that you're open to sharing with this group, feel free to email us. Elise put her email in the chat, but it's ebernardoni@canopysp.com. And I think that's it. Thank you all so much, and happy holidays, happy new year.
Yeah, thanks so much to everybody. And if you have any other ideas for continuing this conversation, send them along, and we'll do another webinar and keep the conversation going. Thank you all very much. Enjoy the holiday. Be safe.
Thank
And
you.
we'll
Happy holidays.
Thanks,
see you in the new
everyone.
year.